Picture a house built in 1942. Not a fancy house. A plain two-story farmhouse on the edge of a small town in Ohio. Wood siding. A front porch with two rocking chairs. A root cellar out back. That house is still standing today. The windows still sealed tight. The floors don't creak the way you'd expect. The roof, replaced once in 80 years, still sheds water like a duck's back. And the family that built it? 3 generations have lived inside those walls. Now picture a house built in 2004 in a new subdivision just outside of Columbus. Vinyl siding, 2-car garage. Looked beautiful the day the family moved in. By year 15, the windows were fogging up, the deck boards were warping, the basement was taking on water, and the builder, long gone, left town after the warranty ran out. What did the folks in 1942 know that the builders in 2004 forgot? That's what we're going to talk about today. Because there were habits, real, practical, everyday habits that the people who built and kept those old houses used without even thinking about it. They didn't read it in a magazine, they didn't hire a consultant. They learned it at their daddy's elbow or their grandmother's kitchen table, and they passed it down the way folks used to pass everything down, by doing it together, season after season, year after year. And here's what I want you to know before we go any further. Every single one of these habits still works. Every one of them can be done today. With your own 2 hands, a little time, and the kind of patience that older folks used to carry around like pocket change. Welcome to Grandpa Almanac. I'm glad you're here today. If this is your first time visiting, we talk about the old ways, the ones that made life simpler, sturdier, and more satisfying. If you've been with us a while, you already know, pour yourself a cup of something warm because we're going to sit a spell. Now, stick with me to the end, because the last habit on our list is the one most people never talk about, and it might be the most important one of all. The first habit is what the old-timers called reading the house. Every spring, before they did a single thing else, the men and women who built those lasting houses would walk around their property slowly, not in a hurry, not with a clipboard. Just walking, looking, listening. They'd crouch down and look at the foundation. They'd run a hand along the wood siding. They'd step back and look at the roof line against the morning sky. My grandfather used to call it having a conversation with the house. He'd say the house was always talking to you. The question was whether you were paying attention. He'd look for a crack in the mortar that wasn't there last fall. He'd notice if the ground near the foundation had settled or shifted. He'd look at the way water was draining away from the house or running toward it. He'd check every window from the outside, running his thumb along the glazing, feeling for places where the old putty had dried and pulled away. This wasn't a chore to him. It was more like a conversation with something he cared about. And when he found something, a loose board, a soft spot in the porch, a place where paint was blistering up, he didn't write it down and forget about it. He fixed it that week. Because he knew what every old builder knew. A small problem, caught in spring, costs an hour. The same problem, ignored until fall, costs a month, and a lot of money you didn't plan on spending. Think about the houses in your own neighborhood, the ones that have held up beautifully for 60 or 70 years. I'd be willing to bet that someone in that house was a reader. Someone who walked the perimeter in April and again in October. Someone who noticed things. That habit, that simple, unhurried attention, is the foundation everything else is built on. The second habit is one your grandparents would have thought so obvious it barely needed saying. They never, ever let moisture have its way. Water is the enemy of a house. Not fire, not wind, not age. Water. Left alone, water will rot wood, rust metal, crack concrete, and turn a solid wall into something you could push your hand through. The old builders knew this down in their bones, and they treated moisture control the way a good farmer treats his soil, constant, careful, never neglected. In those days, every house had gutters that got cleaned twice a year, without fail. Not because someone told them to, because they'd seen what happened when you didn't. They'd seen a neighbor's porch slowly sag and sink because water was draining right along the foundation year after year. They'd seen a good wood floor buckle up because a dryer vent was exhausting into the crawl space. They didn't need a home inspection report to understand cause and effect. Caulking was another big one. Every autumn, before the cold set in, the careful homeowners would walk the outside of the house with a tube of caulk and fresh eyes, around every window, around every door, where the siding met the foundation, where a pipe entered the wall. They sealed everything that could let water in during a driving rain or let warm air out during a freeze. My grandmother kept a little notebook, nothing fancy, just a spiral-bound pad from the five and dime, and she wrote down every place she'd caulked the year before, so she knew exactly where to check first the next time around. That little notebook was a kind of love letter to the house, if you think about it, proof that someone was paying attention. The third habit is one that sounds almost too simple, but it made an enormous difference in how long those old houses lasted. They painted on time, not when the paint looked bad, before it looked bad, because by the time paint starts to peel and blister, the wood underneath has already started to suffer. The old-timers knew that paint isn't decoration, it's protection. It's a coat of armor against moisture and sun and wind, and the moment that armor cracks, the wood beneath it starts its slow decline. In the 1940s, most paint was oil-based, and it needed more upkeep than the latex paints we use today. But the families who cared about their houses painted every 5 to 7 years on the outside, whether it looked like it needed it or not. They'd scrape and sand and prime first, no shortcuts there, because they knew that paint over loose, chalky old paint is just money wasted. My uncle had a saying he used on the younger men in the family whenever they'd try to skip a step. He'd say, "You can do it right once, or you can do it wrong twice." And he was right, every time. Do it right once, or do it wrong twice. You'll hear me come back to that before we're done. Beyond the paint itself, the old builders also chose their wood carefully. They used heartwood whenever they could, the dense, tight-grained center of old-growth trees that contain natural resins to resist rot. That wood is harder to find today, but the principle still holds. Put good materials on the outside of the house, where they take the beating, and they'll last for generations. The fourth habit is something I don't think young people even have a word for anymore. The old folks called it winterizing, and they took it just as seriously as the harvest. Come October, maybe early November, depending on where you lived, the whole household shifted into a different gear. Storm windows went up. Screens came down and got stored in the barn or the attic. Pipes that ran through unheated spaces got wrapped with whatever insulation was on hand, old rags, newspaper, fiberglass batting if you could afford it. The wood stove got inspected and the chimney got swept. The storm door got its bottom sweep replaced if it had worn down over the summer, and the garden hoses. Every last one of them got drained and coiled up and brought inside, because a hose left attached to an outdoor spigot in a freeze could crack the pipe right back into the wall, and that meant water damage to the house itself. None of this was on a to-do list. It was just the rhythm of the year, as natural as planting in spring and canning in summer. The house had seasons, just like everything else on the property, and you moved with them. My father used to say you could judge a man's character by how he kept his house going into winter. A man who let his place go into the cold unprepared, that was a man who hadn't been paying attention all year. And a man who hadn't been paying attention wasn't someone you wanted as a neighbor when trouble came. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You're thinking, all of this sounds like a lot of work. And yes, it is work. But here's the thing about that generation. They didn't separate work from living. The house wasn't just the place you came home to. It was the project, the ongoing project of a family's life. And taking care of it wasn't a burden. It was a source of pride. It meant something. The fifth habit surprised me when I first started really looking into it, because it's something we barely do at all anymore. The old builders and the families who kept those houses going, they repaired instead of replaced. This sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but think about how different it is from the way we live today. A window sash swells and sticks. Today we call a window company and order a replacement unit. Back then, they'd take the sash out, plane a little wood off the edge, repaint it, and put it back in. Half an hour of work, and it would fit perfectly for another 20 years. A floorboard started to squeak. They didn't live with it, and they didn't rip up the floor. They found the joist below, drove a long screw through the board into the joist, countersunk it, and filled the hole with a wooden plug. 5 minutes. Done. A door hinge wore loose. A few wooden matchsticks dipped in wood glue, tapped into the old screw holes, and those screws would grip like new. These little repairs sound trivial, but they weren't. They were the difference between a house that tightened up over time and a house that slowly loosened and fell apart. And there's something else about that repair mindset that I think matters even more than the practical savings. It kept people connected to their house. You can't fix something you don't understand, and you can't understand something you never touch. Those people knew their houses the way they knew their own hands. And here's a quiet truth about that. When you know a thing deeply, really know it, you treat it differently. You take more care. You notice sooner when something's changing. That connection is something we've mostly lost, and it cost us more than we realize. The sixth habit is one that tied the whole community together, and I think it's one of the things people miss most when they look back on how life used to be. Neighbors helped each other. When a house needed a new roof in 1945, the family didn't necessarily hire it out. They waited until a good weekend in September, put the word out, and neighbors showed up with hammers and gloves and a dish to pass. The work got done in a day, and when that neighbor's fence blew down in a storm, you were the one showing up with tools and a strong back. This wasn't charity. It wasn't a favor. It was just the way things worked, because everyone understood something that we've quietly forgotten. No family can keep a house in good condition entirely on their own, forever, through every kind of hardship. Life gets in the way. Someone gets sick. The harvest fails. The husband goes off to war. Having people around you who knew your house, who'd help build a part of it or repair a part of it, meant that the house would survive those hard seasons. There's a word for it that I like. Stewardship. Not ownership, stewardship. The idea that you're not just keeping this house for yourself, you're keeping it for whoever comes next. And that idea, that sense of responsibility that extends past your own years, it changes the way you work. It makes you do it right, because you're not building for today. You're building for your kids and their kids and some family you haven't met yet. If you're enjoying this conversation, I'd love it if you hit that like button. It helps more folks like you find their way here, and it lets me know this is worth your time. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. We do this every week, and I'd be glad to have you back at the table. The seventh habit is one that saved more houses than any other single thing, and it costs almost nothing. The old-timers ventilated everything, and they ventilated it properly. A house needs to breathe, not in a vague poetic sense, in a real physical sense. Warm air rises and carries moisture with it. That moisture has to go somewhere. In a well-ventilated house, it goes out through the attic. In a poorly ventilated house, it builds up in the attic, condenses on the rafters, and starts rotting the structure from the inside out. By the time you see the damage from below, it's already been going on for years. The old builders understood this intuitively, even if they couldn't have explained the chemistry of it. They left gaps at the eaves for air to come in. They put a vent at the ridge or the gable ends for air to go out. And they never, ever sealed up an attic space tight with insulation and called it done. They knew that an attic that couldn't breathe was like a barn with no windows, and August trouble was just waiting in there. Crawl spaces got the same attention. A crawl space under a house needs ventilation, air moving through in the warm months to carry moisture away, or that moisture wicks up into the floor, joists, and the mold and rot follow right behind it. The old houses that are still standing today almost all have crawl spaces with proper vents installed and maintained from the beginning. And inside the house, those old kitchen and bathroom ventilation habits were part of this too. Cooking on a wood stove and boiling a big canning pot for 6 hours straight pumps an enormous amount of moisture into the air. The families that kept their houses tight would open a window or two when they were doing a big cook, not because they were following a rule, because they'd learned from their mothers, from experience, that you don't want all that steam just sitting in the walls. The eighth habit is one that hits close to the heart because it has as much to do with character as it does with construction. They kept honest records. In every well-kept old house, somewhere in a drawer, in a tin box, in the back of the family Bible, there was a record of the house. Not a formal document, just notes, in whatever form made sense to that family. When the roof was replaced, when the well was dug deeper, when the chimney was repointed, what kind of paint was used on the south side of the house, where the sun hit it hardest, what the man at the hardware store said about treating the sill logs before they went back in. These records were practical, yes, but they were also an act of faith. Faith that someone would come after you who would want to know. Faith that the house would last long enough to make the records worth keeping. When my mother sold the family house, the one her parents had built in 1938, there was a folder in the basement, yellowed paper, handwriting from 3 different decades. Every major repair, every upgrade, every problem and its solution, written down in plain language. The man who bought the house, a young fellow, just starting out, he sat at the kitchen table and read through that folder for almost an hour. And when he was done, he looked up and said, "This is the most useful thing I've ever seen come with a house." That folder was 80 years of somebody paying attention. The ninth habit is connected to the eighth, but it goes even deeper. The people who kept those houses going for 100 years, they bought quality, bought it once, and bought it right. This was not a generation that had a lot of money to spare. Not in the 40s and 50s. They lived close to the bone, most of them, and they knew the value of a dollar in a way that's hard to fully appreciate if you haven't lived it. But that closeness to money didn't make them cheap. It made them careful. There is a difference. When my grandfather needed to replace the pump on the well, he didn't buy the cheapest one he could find. He saved up until he could buy the one that the old hardware man, a fellow named Walt, who'd been selling hardware in that town for 30 years, said was the one worth having. Walt would tell you straight. He'd say, "You can get this one for $8 and it'll last you 3 or 4 years if you're lucky. Or you can get this one for 14 and your kids will be arguing about who gets it when you're gone." Grandpa always bought the $14 one. You can do it right once, or you can do it wrong twice. That principle extended to everything. The caulk they used was the best available. The nails they drove were the right size and the right material for the job. The lumber they framed with was allowed to dry properly before it went into the house because green wood shrinks and warps as it dries, and a house framed with green lumber will spend the next decade settling in ways you didn't plan for. They understood in a deep and practical way that quality is the cheapest option in the long run. It just requires that you can see far enough ahead to feel that in your bones. Now I want to pause here because I promised you at the start that we'd get to the habit that most people never talk about, and we're almost there. But first, I want to circle back to something because it's been sitting in the back of my mind this whole time. Every habit we've talked about so far, the spring inspection, the moisture control, the paint, the winterizing, the repairs, the community, the ventilation, the records, the quality materials, every single one of those habits had something in common. Do you know what it was? Time, attention, presence. None of these habits are complicated. None of them require a degree or a special skill or expensive tools. What they require is that you show up regularly with your eyes open and your hands ready to work. That you slow down enough to really see the thing you're responsible for. And that is almost exactly what we've lost. We live so fast now. We're so accustomed to things being disposable, to things being someone else's job, to calling a service and having a specialist come out, that we've lost the habit of just looking at our own house and asking, "What does this place need from me today?" Which brings us to the 10th habit, the one that holds everything else together. They treated the house as a living thing that needed tending, not a product that needed managing. Now, I know that sounds philosophical, But let me tell you what it looked like in practice, because it was the most concrete thing in the world. Every Saturday morning or Sunday after church, or whatever day the family had, there was a standing appointment with the house. Not a big project, not a whole day ordeal. Just 15 or 20 minutes of walking around, inside and out, paying attention, running a hand over the walls, looking at the ceiling for any new stain, checking under the kitchen sink, going down to the basement and looking at the joists, going up to the attic if the weather was fair. This was not extraordinary. This was just what people did. The house was a member of the family. In a sense, it sheltered them. It held their lives. It kept out the cold and the rain, and, like any member of the family, it needed regular attention. Not crisis management, not emergency repair, regular, quiet, consistent tending. My grandmother used to say, and she said it so often it became a kind of family motto, she'd say, "A house kept well is a house kept long." She said it when she was out caulking in October. She said it when she was oiling the hinges on the cellar door. She said it to her children when she showed them how to plane a sticky window sash. And she said it on the day she handed the house keys to her oldest daughter, like she was handing over something sacred, because she was. A house kept well is a house kept long. That's the whole secret, isn't it? It's not complicated, it never was. Those old houses lasted because someone loved them. Not in a sentimental way, in a working, showing up, paying attention way, the kind of love that shows up with a paintbrush and a tube of caulk and an hour to spare on a Saturday morning, the kind of love that keeps a notebook, buys quality once, calls a neighbor when the work is too big to do alone. We talk about how houses don't last like they used to, and people usually blame the materials. The engineered lumber, the vinyl siding, the cheap imported hardware. And sure, those things matter. Better materials make better houses, no argument there. But the houses that lasted in your grandparents' day, they weren't all built with the finest materials in the world. Some of them were built with what was on hand, what could be salvaged, what could be afforded. They lasted because of what happened after they were built. The tending, the attention, the seasons of care laid down year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. A house kept well is a house kept long. I want to leave you with one picture. It's the image I had in my head when I started thinking about this whole thing. It's an autumn afternoon, late October maybe. The sky, that particular shade of blue you only get in fall. The leaves are coming down, and there's an old man walking the perimeter of his house. He's in no hurry. He's got a cup of coffee in one hand and he's just looking, running his eye along the roof line, checking the place where the downspout connects to the gutter, crouching down near the foundation to see how the soil has settled. He's done this so many times he does it almost without thinking, but not quite. There's still real attention in it, real caring. That man built his house to last. Not because he was rich, or educated, or had access to special knowledge, but because he was paying attention every year, every season, year after year. His house is probably still standing. Somewhere out there, some family is living in it right now, and they might not even know the name of the man who built it, but they're warm and dry because of him, because of how he spent his Saturday mornings, because of the notebook he kept in the basement, because of the neighbor he helped re-roof one September who came back and helped him the next. That's the legacy those people left. Not in monuments or memorials, in houses, in solid, warm, still standing houses. So the next time you walk by a house that's been standing for 80 years, really stop and look at it. Don't just see the old house. See all the Saturday mornings, all the springs and winters, all the small repairs done on time, all the attention laid in like mortar between the stones. And then maybe when you get home, walk around your own place, slowly, with your eyes open. You might be surprised what the house has to say. A house kept well is a house kept long. Thank you for being here today. It means a great deal to me to share this time with you. If any of this brought back a memory, a father who walked the perimeter every spring, a grandmother who kept a notebook, a neighbor who showed up with a hammer when you needed one, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. That's my favorite part of doing this, reading those stories. Every one of them matters. And if you'd like to spend more Saturday mornings like this one right here at Grandpa Almanac, the subscribe button is right there waiting for you. We'll see you next time.